This lesson has been prompted by a student of mine, Julie, who asked how to make a more complex looking swimming pool using a script type font. Let's tackle that now. I'll just clear this scene out. Thank you, by the way, Julie, for the question. And let's add in a text object. Shift A, text. Let's scale it up. Let's say 3 times. And look at it from top view. All right, now under the Object Properties tab, this little green one here, we can change the font. Under the Font tab, I'm just going to click this first little file icon under the Regular tab. This is my system's font directory on Windows. See Windows Fonts. I'm going to search for a script type font. And I like the look of this one, Bukhari. I'll select that one. Tab to change what I want it to say. Control A once you're in text editing mode, unusually for Blender. And I'll type curly, C-U-R-L-Y. Tab out of that. And again, over in the text object data properties, we've got a bunch of options here which are going to be useful to us. Starting at the top, this resolution is important. If I start turning that down, you can see how jagged that's making the text. I think we're going to be well advised to turn it up to, say, 32, just to be sure that we've got some nice smooth geometry. 64 would be better, actually. So that's that for shape. Next, we have our geometry options. Let's give this some thickness. Let's say 0.1. Oh, I'm making a schoolboy error here, actually. Let's just make sure that I've applied the scale. Control A, apply scale. Right, now this should work in a more predictable way. That's more like it. So let's give it a thickness of, say, 0.5, 0.25 perhaps. And of course, at the moment, we just have this perfectly sharp edge. There's no bevel on it, but we do have an option down here. Again, under this Object Data Properties tab. The resolution is equivalent to the number of segments of the curve. At the moment, the depth is set to 0. Let's try 0.1 and see what that looks like. Way too big. So let's divide that by, say, 5. Okay, getting closer. Maybe a touch too big still. So let's divide that by 2. Okay, I'm happier with that. I might just turn that down a little bit more. I can see a bit of a problem up here where we have some intersecting geometry. Because of what we're going to do in the next step, that shouldn't matter too much, but I'm going to just turn that down a hair. So let's say 0.0075. Okay, we've still got a bit, but that's something of an improvement. Now let's turn the resolution of this bevel down. Let's make it a sharp, flat bevel. So now it's just got one facet, really. In fact, I tell a lie, that's not true at all. Let's go into Profiles. And we've got presets here. We've just got this straight line. So now we just have a straight bevel, as you can see from this angle here. So now we've got this nice, pleasing piece of chunky geometry. But if we want to make a Boolean with it, we've got to turn it into polygonal geometry. And Blender does make this relatively easy for us. With the F3 search key, I can simply type in convert, and I have an option there mesh, convert to mesh. You can see that the object data tab has changed shape. It's no longer a text object, so we now have this polygon here, reflecting the fact that this is now polygonal geometry. If I go into edit mode, we can see some pretty hairy geometry there, but not to worry, we're going to fix that in a moment. We've got these individual points, which we can now move around if we want, but we're not going to. We're going to use a different tool to turn this into more reasonable, useful geometry for us. Tab out of edit mode, back into object mode, and under the modifiers tab, I'm going to select Remesh. So of course at first that looks pretty scary. What the Remesh modifier is doing behind the scenes is building an approximation of the geometry out of little invisible cubes called voxels. It then wraps a skin around the outside of the voxels to make a surface. The advantage of this is that the resultant surface is made of neat rows and columns of quads with no overlapping surfaces or points. Obviously, the fewer the voxels, the rougher the approximation of the model, and the coarser it looks. Progressively reducing the size of the voxels enables a higher and higher definition voxel model. The only gotcha with this is that each time you reduce the size of each voxel, you are increasing the calculations that Blender has to make in a cubic way. So if I reduce this by half, the size of each voxel reduced by half, well, I'm doubling the number of voxels in each dimension, x, y, and z. So I'm getting 8 times the amount of data. So it's very easy to make this crash. So I'm going in baby steps, reducing it by half each time. You can still see I've got some artifacts here along those bevels. I don't know if I dare go down by 2 again. One thing that I can do to help myself out though, first of all, I will switch on wireframe, and you can see now the size of the polygons that we're dealing with, absolutely tiny. This adaptivity setting here gives Blender a bit of a hand. It tells it, if you've got big flat areas like the tops of the letters, you don't need all these squares to describe such a simple flat area. Use adaptivity to reduce this number of squares whilst keeping detail where we need it. So let's try that. Let's start off high, 0.1. And straight away you can see we've got far fewer squares here and almost the same number on the edge here. So now I think I can quite safely divide that by 2 again, he says. I'm going to smooth that shading as well, never harms. Now I'll switch off wireframe and see where we're at. Perhaps I will switch that off, in fact. Yeah, I'm not so keen on that effect there, so I'm going to take my life in my own hands and switch adaptivity back off. And luckily, the computer lives to see another moment. That's worked. Okay, so now we have a piece of polygonal geometry which I can use to create a Boolean. I think first of all though I will apply this. But before I do, I will make myself a little collection, select what we've got, Shift D to duplicate. Blender won't like that because it's an enormous amount of information. And I will move that into a new collection. I'm going to call that Build. This is something which I sometimes do. It's like a collection which I can come back to if I make a mistake or I ruin something, and I've still got a reasonable starting point. So I'm going to put it in there, but then I'm going to switch that off. Now I'm going to apply this. Blender will chug for a moment, and there we are. Now we've got just a piece of polygonal geometry. I'll move it back into the center of the scene a little bit and add a cube, which will form the basis of our pool. Scale it in X and in Y a bit. Let's see where we're at. Go into wireframe mode. Okay, now I'll simply use the Bool tool, which we've seen before in this course. I'll just remind you of where that is. For those of you who haven't seen it, I'll go into my preferences, add-ons. I'll search for Bool. This is one of the standard add-ons Blender ships with. All you need to do is enable it here. And you'll recall that I select the cutter first, then I select the object that I want to make a cut out of, take a chunk out of, and then I use the Bool tool shortcut Control numpad minus. Blender will have a good think about that. In my case, that took 30 seconds or so. But there you are. There is your booled out swimming pool or whatever it might be. You can, if you want now, apply this bool and then get in there and color this, texture it as you will.